Good evening. Welcome to another great night in Half Moon Bay. The chair of the commission isn't here tonight, so I'm Jimmy Benjamin. I'm the vice chair, and I'll be chairing tonight's meeting. So we'd like to begin. So I call the meeting to order and invite you to rise and join us for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Could we have a roll call, please, Bridget?
Yes. We have Commissioner Hernandez and Chair Holt out this evening. So Commissioner Folgar, here. Commissioner Ruddick.
I am here.
And Vice Chair Benjamin.
I am present.
So we have 3 planning commissioners present this evening.
Okay, that's a quorum, so we can still do stuff. The first item on the agenda tonight, I should begin by reminding all of the commissioners and ask politely of the public. Some members of the public have had difficulty hearing us, so we're going to have to really get into our microphones tonight and I'm going to ask you to do the same. And out of respect for those who cannot hear us, if you tug on your ear like Carol Burnett used to do, that will be a sign that you're not hearing, and I will ask the speaker to raise their voice, okay? So with that in mind, I'd like to consider the first item of business, which is the approval of the minutes of June the 11th. So comments, commissioners. In that case, I would like anything from staff on that? So staff, why don't you tell us what we just got?
Thank you, Vice Chair Benjamin. We received an inquiry from you regarding the input on the 555 Poplar duplex proposal from the previous meeting with respect to input about the 200 yards from Highway 1 with regarding this as being a visual resource area pursuant to the Coastal Commission guidance associated with their review of an appeal on the fire tower project. So we did miss that information, and we have provided a red line version of the minutes for you to consider this change. It says, pursuant to Coastal Commission guidance associated with the fire tower project, the city's intention is for Highway 1 to be treated as a scenic highway, and this designation requires evaluation of the visual resource impacts of projects located within 200 yards of Highway 1.
Thank you. So to be clear, evaluation of visual resource impacts is that we view it as a visual resource area and the visual resource standards apply. Is that correct? Okay, thank you. So I think that Commissioner Polgar wasn't at that meeting, so she'll be abstaining from this vote. But we have we need a quorum of the people who were present. All that drama for nothing.
So we will have a nice, clean, revised copy for your next meeting when I do believe we should have a quorum of that group. I'm sorry that we forgot about that. Thank you.
Okay, in that case.
Did you have other concerns about the minutes, or did that speak to them?
That was my only concern.
Okay.
As long as we've got the item, but before we vote, were there any other, did you have any concerns?
No, I didn't, thanks.
So we're getting close. We'll table this item until our next meeting then. And the next item of business will be what used to be called oral communications, but apparently is now called public comment. And that is the time of our meeting where a member of the public who wants to speak on whatever they want the Planning Commission to hear about that is not on the agenda tonight is welcome to do so. I do not have any green cards from anyone who has a conversation about something like that. I have one from Ms. Burke to discuss an item that is on the agenda. Did you have anything outside of that? You'll get it. If you want it now, that's fine. I'm sorry. My bad. It is public forum. I thought it was an agenda item. In that case, I'll open the public, oral communication public hearing and recognize Carrie Burke. If anybody else would like to speak on an item not on an agenda, just let me know.
Review Committee. I think that when I was on staff some 30 years ago, it was an invaluable resource to me as a community development director, to the Planning Commission at that time. And as you embark on this very weighty topic of our general plan and our LCP, I think it's wonderful that we have other resources within our community, talented people that can share their knowledge and help for the betterment of our city. So I just think it was a great move by the council, and I'm sure that it'll be very useful to everyone that cares about the town. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Seeing no other people wishing to speak on this item, I'll close the oral communications. And now we'll go to our next item of business, which is on the Planning Commission's agenda, a notification by the director to, she's planning to approve a temporary use in the PUD zoning district at 2 Miramontes Point Road. So Jill, I would imagine this is yours.
And in brief, you have seen this every year for quite a few years now, and I see that our applicant is here in case you have questions, but this is about a tent, which is a temporary installation for a period of on the order of 89 days, so fewer than 90 days. If it was longer, then you would be seeing it as an actual item. If you have any concerns, this would be the time to bring them to us, and we can move the item up to you. There's really no action. This is just about notification, making sure people are informed, and just acknowledging that you've seen this.
Okay, so, and you're planning to approve that when?
Probably tomorrow.
Probably tomorrow. Okay,
Yes.
so if any of the planning commissioners have any concerns they want to raise, or if the public wants to raise a concern, you can tackle Jill tonight, apparently. Otherwise, we are notified. Any other comments or questions? Okay. In that case, Commissioner Polgar. In the mic.
So it sounds like this has been done for multiple years, is my understanding. And so they're able to handle all the parking that goes along with the events and everything? Okay.
And I'm mindful that in the news a couple weeks ago, there was a bit of hue and cry about some improvements in coastal access at the Ritz. And I want to be sure that, I'm sure they're thinking hard about this and making sure that what they're doing is consistent with the terms of the coastal access settlement that they've arranged with the Coastal Commission. So without needing to know the details, I'm sure you'll be mindful of it as well. Okay. All right then, let's move on to the other item on our agenda that is of public interest here, I think, and that is a public hearing item concerning our local coastal plan, local coastal land use plan update. And Jill is going to give us a briefing of, or Team Jill, I guess, is going to give us a briefing on the latest additions that we've been working on for the last couple of months. So take it away.
All right, thank you. Brittany Cozzolino and I will be presenting together tonight. Brittany is your associate planner who's been working very hard on this document preparation. And we just want to, once again, appreciate everyone who's been turning out for this item, and reminding folks that this is another study session. It's not a decision-making meeting. And to reiterate the statement that we have made at all of these sessions is that we pay attention to potential conflicts of interest that any individual commissioner may have. Under the Political Reform Act, the commission can oversee general plan and local coastal program updates. However, when it comes to matters concerning specific parcels on maps, individual commissioners may need to recuse themselves. Following public comment, when this item comes back to the commission for discussion, we request that individual commissioners acknowledge if there are specific items that you would like to discuss. If that is the case, if it's more than a general discussion about a topic, we will make sure that individual commissioners have time to acknowledge that if they believe they have a conflict and need to excuse themselves for that portion of the discussion. We're not anticipating, once again, we're not anticipating this tonight, but should that come up, we appreciate your candor. All right, so tonight, so we haven't seen you in a couple months. We've been working very hard, and some documents are available now to you in the back table, and they'll all be posted tomorrow. And we're going to give you a presentation on what we've been up to, the documents that are now out for your consideration, understanding that you have not seen them yet. We're trying to introduce them to you so you know what to look for. It's really kind of a tour of what you're about to dig into. We're going to also acknowledge the next chapter that's coming, which is Public Works, which is our final chapter, and make a few notes about some of the initial dialogue that we've been having with Coastal Commission staff on all of the draft chapters that have been out in the public forum to date. There'll be time for clarifying questions. There's nothing else on the agenda tonight. There should be plenty of time for that. And the meeting will end with a review of our next steps. And with that, it's time to turn it over to Brittany to get into the content.
Thank you, Jill. So as Jill mentioned, these are the chapters that we are putting out to the public tonight. You have hard copies in front of you. There are some at the front table as well. So this is everything but the Public Works chapter that is remaining for the 2019 Land Use Plan update. So I will go quickly through a couple of the sections, as will Jill, and we will be coming back for a study session on Public Works later this summer.
Excuse me, Brittany, not to interrupt, but I noticed that the light is beginning to glare at the bottom of the screen when it's coming through. Maybe we can, thank you. For the benefit of the public, I want to try to make it as easy to read as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Bridget. I'll keep going. Is that okay? All right. Good. All right. So chapter 1 is an introduction and framework. To dive in a little bit, the chapter is intended to provide the reader with a sense of purpose and context of the land use plan update, and it walks through the physical setting of the planning area, the Coastal Act requirements and procedures surrounding local coastal programs, and the primary land use planning issues and circumstances of the existing 1996 land use plan, as well as what's changed since then and led to the plan that you've been reviewing this year. The chapter also goes over the major policy guidance that we've received from the GPAC, the Planning Commission, and the City Council, and it concludes with 5 foundational policies, as does the existing land use plan. So this graphic is included in Chapter 1 to help the reader understand the relationship between the local coastal program and the general plan. Specifically, the land use plan will comprise the land use element of our general plan. There are other relationships between the individual chapters of the land use plan and the elements of the general plan. So we just wanted to show that connection here. There are overlapping topics. Everything is intended to be internally consistent. For consolidation's sake, we are using for example, the coastal hazards chapter as the majority of our safety element. We've discussed this a little bit at some of the previous study sessions, but this is all brought up front in this introduction and framework chapter as an overview. So as we move on with the land use plan update process, staff will be going back and finishing up the update of the remaining general plan elements, as well as zoning code amendments to be consistent with the land use plan update. The original land use plan acknowledged the fragmented land use patterns and growth management concerns and resource protection difficulties that we are still facing today. And the plan specifically called out these 3 land use planning issues as the most significant. And those included the provision of adequate housing sites, the achievement of coastal act goals, and the need for residential growth limitations. So these probably look familiar to what we're still dealing with today. But some things have changed since the original certification of our existing land use plan. We have our Measure D residential growth limitation. We've seen water supply limitations, the water connection system that was conditioned by the Coastal Commission in a CDP appeal. We've seen the continued viability of agriculture. The existing land use plan assumes that would not happen. We've seen some major land acquisitions by posts and coastside land trusts that have shaped, for example, North Wave Crest. And we've seen climate change and sea level rise, emerging best available science. We've seen its impacts on our coastal erosion, flooding of our riparian corridors, and we expect that to continue. So this chapter provides a quick overview of those changed land use circumstances. These are all, this information is really detailed additionally in Charles Lester's white paper from 2017 on our land use plan update and our residential growth constraints and land use changes. So some of that information should look familiar to you if you've read that. So and then all of these land use change circumstances are really a summary of the policies that you've already seen in the existing chapters. So they laid the foundation for many of the policy changes, such as the changed boundary of North Wave Crest because of those land acquisitions, and the protective and supportive policies in the agriculture chapter because of its continued viability. So the chapter goes on to discuss new Coastal Commission guidance that has also shaped our land use plan update. Specifically, their sea level rise guidance from 2015. They're looking to adopt their residential adaptation specific sea level rise guidance the end of this year, I believe. So our land use plan update has been shaped around many of those guiding policies as they relate to our coastal resource protection. The Coastal Commission also came out with a tribal consultation policy last year, and that really looked to strengthen the coordination and excuse me, with the Native American tribes. And this year, the environmental justice policy was adopted, and this was a really important one, especially because the Coastal Act actually removed their affordable housing protections very early on. But they've recognized affordable housing as a form of environmental justice and social equity, really as a way to diversify coastal access and offset those very high housing prices that really push out lower income families. So as I mentioned, the policy direction from the GPAC and the Planning Commission and the City Council are all given an overview of in this chapter as well. Of course, each of these groups have put a ton of work into what went into this land use plan update, but just to hit a couple of the highlights, the GPAC established 6 guiding principles, including protection of coastal resources and protection of our small town character. The Planning Commission confirmed priorities for land use development and conservation in 2017 with a focus on residential, commercial, and agriculture land uses. And the City Council's recent annual priority setting has focused on development in the town center and provision of affordable housing, community involvement, and sustainability and resilience. And the chapter concludes finally with the 5 foundational policies, as I mentioned. So the existing plan also concludes with 5 policies. 2 of those were combined into one to affirm the coastal resource protection priorities in interpretation of any land use plan and general plan policy. And then we added a policy to affirm the city's commitment to environmental justice and social equity in the implementation of the policies of this plan. And that is it for our overview of the intro and framework chapter, and Jill will continue on.
All right, so there's a few other items that you received tonight. Some of them are more easily digestible than others, but they're all very important. Appendix A contains a list of all the local coastal program amendments and coastal development permit appeals that have been heard by the Coastal Commission since certification of the 1996 document. This list is just a summary of the amendment or appeal with the Coastal Commission file number, action, and action date, which can be used to look up the full staff report on the Commission's website. This appendix is intended to be a living document to be updated as future amendments and appeals occur. So it will not be part of the certified land use plan because we'd like to be able to append it as we need to. But it's really meant to provide a helpful background on previous changes made to the LCP and any precedent-setting actions taken by the Coastal Commission that helped inform this land use plan update, such as lot retirement to offset impacts to new subdivisions. So we also find from our own research and working on this project that just compiling this has been really helpful to the staff that are at City Hall now, our city attorneys, and we would assume the community, as well as future staffers and planning commissioners, et cetera. So we hope you find it to be a useful resource, and it's really just an index for getting you to the Coastal Commission's documents. All right, so Appendix B. This is probably the one that's been taking us the most time, no question about that. This is build out, and it's the backup to what you're going to see in the Public Works chapter pretty soon, and I'll be talking about that in a little bit. Appendix B is our best effort to do very responsible modeling for the build out of this plan. And it's showing the math. We want this to be really apparent to folks in terms of how this was put together. So it contains calculations and all the supporting assumptions and sources used to develop the build-out projections. The build-out projections are very important. They provide insight into the carrying capacity of the city and anticipated infrastructure demand. Because of that, there are 2 levels that are presented. There's a 2040 plan horizon projection, which helps foresee infrastructure needs for the life of this land use plan update. And then also, as required by the Coastal Act, the maximum theoretical build-out, which considers all potential development sites and opportunities in Half Moon Bay. The second level is very unlikely to ever occur, as it represents an extreme scenario of development, but it's necessary to consider for long-range land use and infrastructure planning, and just to really understand the implications of various land use choices. This build-out assessment that you'll have some time to look at, the Appendix B, it addresses both residential and non-residential development. It includes vacant sites, infill opportunities, underutilized properties, and it also presents comparisons to projections of those made in the 1996 land use plan and as it's been revised over time. This build-out is specifically based on the draft Chapter 2 development chapter that has been out in the public realm since December 2018. We would anticipate that through the public input process and the Planning Commission direction that there may be some revisions made to Chapter 2, and that could affect build-out, and then the build-out analysis will be adjusted to correlate to that. But this is what's already been out there, and so these are the numbers that we're presenting at this point in time. And we'll discuss a little bit more about how those numbers are going to be used. So clearly you haven't had time with this yet. We will be looking at it in more detail when the Public Works chapter comes out. So you'll have at least a month to take a look at Appendix B and compare it to the Chapter 2, the development chapter. But just so you know what went into it, this analysis was done in many cases on a parcel by parcel level. We used Geographic Information System, our GIS, county assessors data, the certified housing element, including noted housing sites, American Community Survey data, and ABEG data, and additional baseline data that was produced over time for this project. And all of those assumptions are noted in the build-out document. Build-out also considered land use and zoning standards that would impact the development of individual sites. So for the 2040 projections, that's the easier one to do. So we use data from city permit history. There was also a 2014 study by Economic Planning Systems. It was a report for the Economic and Real Estate Conditions and Trends document that was prepared by our former consultants. It informed the plans, Horizon build-out, but this was further refined via ABAG's really detailed modeling that includes their newest analysis, which came out at the very end of 2018. So it's fresh, which is really helpful to us. The limitations of Measure D were considered, but recent residential development trends have actually been quite a bit lower than the permitted 1% growth. In fact, for quite a few years running now, we're on the order of about 1/3% per year. All right, so the 1996 land use plan also includes residential build-out projections, but it did not include non-residential build-out projections. It did look at priority uses, but it did not consider all of the non-residential uses throughout the city. So that was a challenge for us because we really didn't have anything to transition from. So we've developed that from scratch for you. The residential build-out from 1996 estimated that there would be about 8,000 total dwelling units at the maximum theoretical build-out of the plan that's on the books right now, and that includes the units that were residential dwelling units that existed at the time that analysis was conducted. So that's the total, existing plus new. The majority of those units came from undeveloped planned development areas. The anticipated conversion of urban reserve and open space reserve areas, because it was presumed, as Brittany already noted, that ag and ag-related operations would not persist. The build-out also did not include density bonus units or accessory dwelling units, although these are both allowed under the existing LCP. In fact, Measure A and Measure D both acknowledge density bonus units, but they just weren't calculated into it. So we made a conservative estimate and trying to add those in because we thought it was important to acknowledge that. And we believe that about 100 density bonus units could have possibly be added to the town center under the existing conditions, and up to 150 units in some of the larger planned development areas that have a high number of residential units in their build-outs. Noting that the city has a density bonus ordinance, and it can allow up to a 35% density bonus on projects of certain sizes. So we use the same assumptions and thresholds on the 1996 plan as we did on our draft 2019 plan, whereas you'll see in the development chapter we actually track them all the way through. That said, we would be very, very surprised if all of those density bonus units were ever developed. That's very unlikely. We also estimated 265 accessory dwelling units. That was based on the 3 per year that have been developed in recent years under the previous ordinance, and going out to 2,100 for an 80-year period. So we ended up with about 8,500 total units for the 1996 plan, the plan on the books now. So the build out that you're going to look at now for the updated land use plan includes density bonus units, accessory dwelling units, as well as some of the new things that have been sewn into your draft development chapter. That includes the priority residential overlay, for example, where we're looking at matching workforce housing on sites as close as possible to Coastal Act priority uses in most cases. The build-out projections carry forward the policies of the development chapter, concentrating new units in the town center, while dialing down density outside of the town center to protect sensitive habitat areas and agricultural land, while also reinforcing a more sustainable development pattern. The build-out does not include transfer of development right units, as these units would be moving density from one place to another, to a more appropriate development site, rather than necessarily changing the total number of units. And we thought it would be speculative to go deeper into that, since we're going to be working on TDR. If you approve the plan with this policy, it will be developed further. Overall, the updated build-out estimates a total of about 7,100 units, approximately 1,400 less than the 1996 plan. Table B4 summarizes this comparison further by showing the new units that would be allowed under the existing and updated draft land use plan for maximum theoretical build-out. And then it's set in the context of how many units are on the ground today, which we've estimated at just over 4,800. The result is a 38% decrease in new units from what the existing land use plan would allow. Although this is a big change, this build-out and the development chapter policies that support it are prioritizing development in the town center where it is deemed to be most appropriate, and avoiding development where it would cause impacts to coastal resources. A few notes about the tables in Appendix B. This is really important to the reader. So there's source data is accounted for differently. There's quite a few tables in Appendix B, and it's used in different ways from table to table. The footnotes are extremely important to read. There's almost 30 of them. And it may appear sometimes that data does not correlate from one table to the next. And that's because, for example, in the, there's an assessment of the PDs that are on the books now and those that are proposed in the 2019 document. and they're looked at each other head to head all the way through. And then in the very next table, we're accounting for planned developments that are in the town center, in a town center line and not separated out in the planned developments. And there's footnotes that cover all of that. If it doesn't look like the numbers are working their way through for you, read those footnotes, and if that isn't working, at that point, come on in and we'll show you, because this was done meticulously by Brittany, and I pounded on it with my calculator for a long time, and we also had a subcommittee review it, including Vice Chair Benjamin, who gave us, he found a couple interesting numbers that we had to go back and work on. So please come in. If you do find a mistake, we'll be very upfront and we'll make the correction, but it should be there. There's a final table. This is really the big sum up. This is where we come up with the number of housing units, which backs into projected population, and the square footage of non-residential space, wherein we apply some factors for job density to get an estimated number of jobs. We note that the number of jobs for 2040 appears to be a very low increase. Jobs very sensitively to the economy, and that actually just about matches ABAG, and we'll track it a little bit more and see if we've made the right assumptions. But frankly, we've been looking at it over a long period of time, and it hasn't varied very much. So we pretty much agree with what ABAG has been saying about the city's jobs for quite a few versions of their projections. And you'll note the difference between the 2040 and then the maximum theoretical build-out. So we are, again, very available to help anybody spend time on Appendix B. Both of us, either one of us can work with you and encourage you to do so. And then finally, we've got a couple more things that came through. One of those is a glossary and a list of acronyms. The terms and definitions in the glossary are found throughout the land use plan update. They are intended to be fully consistent with the Coastal Act, state housing law, and other relevant definitions in the Public Resources Code. Definitions in the glossary should be matching the terms and the definitions in your land use plan and vice versa, and that's been quite carefully checked. You may note that you wish you had some more definitions. If anything comes up that you wish was defined in the glossary and pulled out to help the public read the document and to make it a better resource, let us know. If you find discrepancy, let us know. The glossary and list of acronyms are intended to be an adopted part of the land use plan, as is Appendix B, the build-out math. All right. So I get to talk very briefly about what's coming next. We wanted this for you tonight. It's not ready. We are still working with quite a few engineers and other technical folks to run the numbers. They're basically, they're using the build-out numbers and giving us some input on sewer capacity. In particular, the city has a consultant who does a lot of our sewer work, and then we're working with a transportation firm who is going to do a first run model of the development chapters build out, noting that we expect it to not perform very well. We know that the road isn't performing very well right now. We also know that the Connect the Coast site plan showed us some real challenges with increased delay on the roadways, and we wouldn't expect any big positive, happy surprises about the circulation system, and we'll talk about that. and show them to you and lay it bare. It's very important. But we also expect to have to run our model a few times. This is normal, so what comes out in the Public Works chapter in the next month or so, don't be surprised if we need to adjust the build-out and run the model again. This is really normal. It happens all the time with general plan updates, so it's iterative. And then water. We're also working on water numbers, and we've got kind of a high-level discussion about stormwater management in the Public Works chapter. It's covered in quite a bit more detail in the natural resources chapter that you already have. There's a large section in there about hydrology and water quality. So you'll need to probably revisit that bit of chapter 6 when you're reading the stormwater section. The circulation piece also leaves the details to the coastal access and recreation chapter, but is focused primarily on the major roadways. So Highway 1 and 92 are really the emphasis of the Public Works chapter with regards to circulation. Automobile, roadway circulation. We've covered many details of the other modes in coastal access and recreation. And we've been trying really hard to not duplicate, so you'll see that. And then they're going to give me something else. And then back to Brittany. One of the things that City Council asked us to do, as well as the Planning Commission, is to make sure that the Coastal Commission staff is in the loop with us. You know that some of those members have attended some of our meetings over time. They've come to GPAC meetings, they've come to Planning Commission meetings, and they have all of the draft chapters that you have. We coordinate with them regularly, and they've been giving us some feedback. You've noted it in the memo that we presented to you tonight, but Brittany's going to cover a few other highlights.
Thank you. So just to reiterate, yes, the Coastal Commission staff has been going through all the chapters that are available to the public now. We've been meeting with them regularly to work through these chapters, and the more we are able to do this pre-submittal coordination with them, the more we're able to work on their suggested modifications with you and with the City Council, and before we go to them with a official submittal for land use plan certification. So we've received feedback on all of these chapters listed here, all of the chapters available to the public, and just to hit some highlights of their feedback. On the development and agriculture chapters, their concerns were related to the need to concentrate development where there are existing developed areas and public services available, and that's Coastal Act Section 30250, as well as our implementation of the agriculture policies of the Coastal Act, which require protection of prime ag land and prohibits conversion unless there is some evidence that that land can no longer be used for agriculture, or if conversion of that land would support concentration of development as under 30250. So staff has been very supportive of our concentration of development in our town center. Outside the town center, they were concerned about protection of prime ag land. Where we have the space and the ability to protect coastal resources, avoid conversion of ag, avoid coastal hazards, we should be doing it. And we were looking to do that with our net acreage policy in the development chapter, and would like to go back and take a look at that and see how we can tighten the ag protection under that policy. So this would mainly be looking at the undeveloped PDs outside the town center. For the coastal access and recreation chapter, they suggested a short-term rental policy. They commented on our provision of lower cost overnight accommodations policy, looking to increase the percentage of that provision where there are either only higher cost accommodations provided, or there's conversion of lower to higher cost. In the natural resources chapter, they were concerned with the length of it. It is hefty. One suggestion they had was pulling out the 2 tables of the list of animal and plant species and putting that into an appendix. So we would like to do that. We can keep that a living document like Appendix A, like Jill went over, to keep that as a list that we can add to over time. So that will get you to the policies of the natural resources chapter a little bit quicker. And they also suggested reducing the complexity of the ESHA types and buffer requirements, and relying more on the results of a biological resource evaluation, as is already required in policy, to determine the needed buffer. So we will be talking to them about that further. The coastal hazards chapter, they honed in on the definitions of redevelopment and existing structure. This is in reference to a specific coastal act policy that I can't remember the number of right now, but it's mainly about what has right to shoreline protective devices and what doesn't. So their recent sea level rise guidance really made it clear that they are taking the stance that an existing structure means pre-Coastal Act. Redevelopment post-Coastal Act would also give a sense of a new structure that would not be not allowed to have that shoreline protective device were it in need. We were close on those definitions. I don't think it significantly changed what we came out with, but it is something that they've been honing in on other land use plan updates around the state. And they also commented on chapter organization of the coastal hazards chapter, and really just making it clear what is a hazard that's happening on the shoreline versus inland of the shoreline. The cultural resources chapter, pretty light. They just reminded us to double check the new tribal consultation policy guidance and ensure consistency with that. And I copied the coastal hazards again. The last one was scenic and visual resources. They're mainly looking for clarification on the definitions of our visual resources there, what exactly a view corridor is, where it's a visual resource from, and what it's a visual resource to, as well as protection of undeveloped areas outside the town center. So again, looking at that concept of developing where it's appropriate to develop and not where it will impact coastal resources, including visual. Okay, and that's all we have.
Okay, thank you very much. That was an interesting presentation. So now it's time to receive comments, questions from the Planning Commission, if anyone has them, to try to clarify. And of course, the public will have a chance to weigh in tonight, and again after you had a chance to pour through the material that's been prepared. So this isn't your one shot, but I think it's important to have the public weigh in with things that tickled their curiosity. So let us hear from you as well. Commissioner Pogar.
Thank you very much. I am looking forward to digging into this. I had a couple clarifying questions. One related to the kind of interplay between the build-out appendix and the forthcoming Public Works chapter. And so it wasn't clear to me if the build-out will it's that appendix, that's the analysis, and unless there's something incorrect, like an error in it, that will remain the same. But in a sense, the Public Works analysis and that chapter overlays the build-out Is that my understanding? Or will it actually end up leading potentially to changes in that appendix, that analysis that was done for Appendix B?
So Appendix B is the math that leads to the final numbers, which need to be modeled in different ways for the different systems that we're looking at. So, for example, for sewer, it's not as sensitive to where development occurs. We're a lot more concerned about which district is the development located in, and then, of course, it all goes to the same plant. Now, we're not anticipating that there will be a sewage capacity issue. We already know this, so we're not planning because of sewer to change something in the development chapter to accommodate it. Similar with water. So, of course, the whole city is in the CCWD service area, as well as some unincorporated portions of San Mateo County Midcoast, Princeton, the northern portion of Miramar, and El Granada. So we're looking at water supply and water demand for the plan, as well as remembering to go and look at what our friends in the county did with their LCP, and making sure that there's adequate water supply for everything. Otherwise, water supply needs to be reserved for priority uses, which is something that is in your 1996 plan right now. So we're not anticipating that to be an issue either at this point in time. Now, transportation is going to be an interesting one for you. So we're just going to model what we have in there, and you'll see what the results are. Noting that San Mateo County had a really big build out, which did not obviously perform well in the circulation modeling, and their local coastal program, my understanding that it was in fact certified by the Coastal Commission, but with requirements that a congestion management plan be prepared, and in the meantime they were put into a 1% growth cap, an annual growth similar to our Measure D that we have per ballot measure. So we already have that constraint in place. This is something that we have not had a chance to talk to Coastal Commission staff about at this point, and we will, and we'll bring that information back to you. So we're going to model what is in the development chapter and let you take a look at the results, and then we'll go from there. Yeah.
Steve?
Thank you. And thanks to you both. It's easy to see that there's a lot of analysis and hard work, and no doubt blood, sweat, and tears gone into this. I look forward to digging into it. I did have a couple of questions about Appendix B. While I have the chance to question you, in Table 4, I don't see footnotes explaining the methodology of those numbers, where the two middle columns about the 96 estimated maximum build-out, how do you arrive at those?
So these numbers are coming forth from previous tables. So existing residential units 2018 is presented in Table B1 on the bottom of page B3. So that 4863 is brought forward.
Right.
And then new units allowed under the 1996 land use plan, estimated maximum build out would come from Table B3, the 8498, and I believe that we would subtract then the existing units that we have now, the 4863, and that it's a difference. And then similarly, the 7,099 from Table B3 under total units permitted under 2019 land use plan, we would also subtract the number of existing units at the time this modeling was done. So that's where the 2236 comes from, and we could add a note. And you know, this got really footnote heavy, and we talked about putting that into a narrative. Not sure which is easier.
I'm a fan of footnotes.
You like the footnotes, so we yeah, and there will be narrative in Public Works. So give it a test drive, and we could certainly make some notes on how B4 came to be, but it was really intended to just use data that had been crunched through in previous tables.
Yeah, that's good. I think the footnote approach actually is superior, so I'd encourage you to stick with that, and maybe footnotes to that table would solve the question. One question on table 7, B7. Do I understand that the 2040 projections, existing plus new, is essentially based on the 0.7% annual increase from the various data you've looked at, layered on top of the existing inventory? Okay. One note, under the jobs row, the 2018 to 2040 change has got the decimal point in the wrong place. That should be 0.3%, not 3%. And if we're really forecasting to add 17 jobs in Half Moon Bay in the next 20 years, that's very demoralizing. But I know you're looking at the data. I remember at the City Council's listening session a few months ago, I spoke about my desire to see them prioritize seeing what the public sector can do to encourage employment on the coast side as a way of helping solve at least a little bit our traffic problem. So if we add 17 jobs in the next 20 years, we probably won't make much of a dent in the traffic situation. But anyway, I know that isn't a priority that's part of this, but it's not part of this chapter or something that you're working with, but it's striking to me.
We do want to respond a little bit. It's very important, and that there's quite a few challenges in getting to that number. First of all, I am not confident in the 2018 existing number, and we are checking other sources for that, and so the base for it might not be, this is the best reference that we have right now. So we will be looking at that. That said, employment densities really vary a lot, and we can present some more information about that. You can imagine a restaurant has really high employment density, but a lot of the land uses that this plan anticipates that would have quite a bit of floor area have relatively low employment density. So that's why these big numbers are relating to a fairly small delta. But we'll go back and look at this, and that's why I highlighted it, because I knew it was a bit of a funny looking number, and we know that, and we'll work on it. Okay.
One more question on the Coastal Commission staff feedback. Brittany, you said they had a comment about short-term rentals, but I didn't grok what it was.
Yeah, you know, short-term rentals are a visitor-serving use, and the Coastal Commission has been generally quite supportive of them, encouraging them, in fact, and their feedback on the Coastal Access and Rec chapter. There's a draft policy about supporting accommodations of different sorts, and they wanted us to punch it up with references to encouraging short-term rentals. And we just want to let you know about that because our interest in that is a fewfold from a staff perspective. The Planning Commission has hosted a study session on short-term rentals. We intend to come back to you with more work on that in the future. We've had to back burner that a little bit with this other work. And the draft development chapter has a policy that has been presented to you regarding short-term rentals that is a little bit more tempered than their encouragement because the city, in that study session format and through other kinds of channels that we have as staff members receiving comments and concerns from residents, is to be very careful about short-term rentals and that we need to, yes, maybe encourage them, but in a manner that is really consistent and compatible with neighborhood character and what can be accommodated in our existing neighborhoods. So that's why we brought it up to you. We think we have a minor conflict with maybe the emphasis of encouraging them. That said, they also understand that Half Moon Bay is concerned about them. So it's language that we'll keep talking to them about, and when we come back with more feedback from them, we intend to give you language that they're comfortable with and we think that you will be comfortable with, and of course you'll let us know.
Thank you very much.
Yes, by all means, Sarah.
While we're on the topic of the Coastal Commission feedback, I was interested to learn a little bit more about the feedback around the ESHA types and buffer requirements. It sounded like they said, oh, that's too complex, and so I wanted to find out, and that they would, in a little bit, it almost sounded like maybe we'd punt a little bit to the to a biological resource evaluation that's on a case-by-case basis, but I wanted to find out how far that goes and make sure that they weren't suggesting no stopgap, so.
We haven't gotten a chance to get into more detail with Coastal Commission staff on that yet. That was just a preliminary, very general comment on the complexity.
Okay, so since I was a member of the subcommittee, I got to ask a lot of my questions over the last couple of months. But as usual, when I hear a great report like I heard tonight, it always spurs more questions. So let me lob a couple over and see what I get. With respect to the protection of visitor serving, there have been rumblings, for maybe a decade, about some of our visitor serving, low-cost visitor housing being converted to resident affordable housing in a kind of a de facto way. Did that come up in the conversation with the Coastal Commission? And if so, is it anything you feel comfortable talking about at this point, or is it just kind of hearsay and what do we do with it when we don't have anything?
They made a note about it. They brought it up. We recognize that it's a very challenging topic, and we didn't get farther than that. So I know it actually came up at your last meeting in reference to another project that's coming your way. So it's difficult, and we don't have a full briefing for you on that tonight, but they did note it to us.
Okay, so I'll stop there for now and try to remember to comment on it later after we've heard from the public. With respect to the 1996 build-out projections, we kind of built in some ADUs as a way of understanding our comparison. It's also true, and I wonder if it's in addition to or part of that extrapolation, that there are some, how should I call them, informal ADUs that exist already. Are they sort of contained within your guesstimate of the 1996 number?
So, partially. We would anticipate that existing ADUs that were developed without benefit of a permit would hopefully a number of them become legalized over time. Now, that in the last 5 or so years, I think that's happened with maybe a couple, which is actually quite a few when you consider the city was only doing 3 ADUs a year for quite a few years. Now, under the new ordinance, we anticipate having more developed per year, at least in the short term, until some of that appetite for them has really been satisfied. But the new ordinance should also help legalize ADUs. So we thought about it in both cases. It's very difficult to model that. And the city actually had a, what was that ordinance? Yes, we had an amnesty ordinance in place for a while, and no one came in. There were no applications to legalize any ADUs during that period. I'm not sure why. We weren't here. I don't know how it was marketed or anything like that, but it's a difficult thing to do, and we're actually pushing using the ordinance you have now. Not that answers your question. It's a tangent. So, yes, some of
Okay,
them
fair.
seem to be in there.
Just little
And-
sticky things there.
But and the other challenge is we don't know how many of them are out there. No city does.
Right.
Okay.
So let's see. Now let me turn to the natural resources chapter, feedback you got from the Coastal Commission. Now, I've already asked this question to you, so it won't be a surprise, but I'm guessing that it might be of interest to some of the public. The idea of moving the list of, some list of animals that are protected from inside the chapter where it has the benefits of being certified, and changes to it, specifically deletions to it, have the benefit of being certified. Moving that to a place where they were not in the certified document provides some flexibility, but some people may also have concerns that it provides too much flexibility in some ways. Can you comment on how we would be assuring that the species that what we want to protect will remain protected, regardless of whether that specific list appears in the uncertified appendix or not?
Absolutely. That list is redundant to the narrative in that chapter, which is why Coastal Commission staff informed us that it wasn't necessary to include it. The narrative lists every single animal and plant species that is required to be protected, and thus all of those will be certified as they are. To remove them out of your chapter would require an amendment to the land use plan. We just think it would be really nice to be able to add things quickly to the appendix, need be, while we're going through the process of certification if we needed to add any species. But it's not a tool for diminishing what's protected. It's really a reference document.
Thank you. With respect to the feedback you got on the hazards chapter, let's see. I noticed that they were proposing a reorganization, but I gather that they were not proposing a change to the nature of the protections. There was not an intention to say the only hazards that we care about as far as certifying are the things right up the shoreline. If it's in the coastal zone, we care about the hazard. Is that where they are, or where are they?
We've talked to them about the content in our hazards chapter and how it goes above and beyond what is typically in a local coastal program hazards section, because we are entirely within the coastal zone, and this is comprising our safety element as well. They're very understanding of that. Of course, everything is very interconnected, and no, they aren't placing any less or more weight on things that happen at the shoreline, and they just have jurisdiction over it.
Okay, I get it. And I know that you made references to the Public Works chapter. I know we're not there yet, but in conceptual terms, if we, whatever build-out numbers we have for 2040 or, you know, maximum theoretical at some point in the future, my grasp of our current philosophy, and I believe the Coastal Act philosophy, is that we're supposed to be phasing our provisions of infrastructure so that we do not create growth-inducing behavior. But it also recognizes that infrastructure is not a continuum that we can just incrementally add micro units of. Do we anticipate a change in that philosophy in the way we're doing the planning for the Public Works chapter? And I can take my answer standing on one foot if it's complicated.
I'm trying to decide if that was a clarifying question.
I meant
Yeah.
I meant it to be.
Yeah, so I think you need to give us a chance to finish the modeling.
Early.
And we understand that that is a requirement, and there's sort of a balance, well, not really a balance, but not letting one system get ahead of others, for example. So generating a whole bunch more sewage treatment capacity in advance of having transportation capacity available. That goes beyond the certified land use plan build out. That's really the caveat that we see in their policy. So we're not intending to change that, but we don't quite know how that is going to phase out since we
Right.
haven't finished
And that was not
modeling.
intended to be a
Okay.
sharp question.
All right.
That was just, I wanted to, and the target for Public Works is the 2040 horizon. We're not looking for a build-out that provides maximum theoretical.
No, we were actually doing our first model runs on the maximum theoretical build-out. We plan to do both, but we are taking the biggest build-out first because we know people are worried about that, and it needs to also be done. So we're checking both.
Okay, so follow-on question. If, as we evolve our plan, it turns out, for example, the build-out that we might have done analysis based on the capacity of North Wavecrest, say in 1996, that's gone now, right? So we don't need to provide capacity for that. Is there a provision in our, could there be, should there be a provision in our Public Works chapter to be able to adapt to reductions in intensity of land use should they occur? Or are we planning now for a capacity that's going to be hard to change? And if you want to think about it for a while, that's fine too, I get it.
I do want to think about that a little bit, and I'd like you to ask the question again in a little bit because we're having a dialogue about how to answer that, and I'm just.
Yeah. I think
okay.
that's a provocative question.
It is, and it's not.
And I don't know that there's an answer right now.
Well, and we're not modeling the 1996 plan.
Right. I meant it as an illustration, forward thinking.
Yep.
So, okay,
Yep.
fair enough.
Okay.
Well, the public has been very patient with my questions. Good questions, thank you both. Thank you. At this point, I think the next item on the agenda is for us to open the public hearing on this item. I don't have any green sheets. I have a green sheet on its way. And if anyone wants to speak, you are welcome to fill out a green sheet after the fact. And we look forward to hearing your thoughts. And just a reminder, the way our mics work, it's really hard for the public to hear you if you don't practically swallow the microphone. So please lean in and let us hear every fricative and explosive consonant. And we'll begin with Lenny Roberts.
So is this on? It's green. That must mean it's on. Okay, thank you. Lenny Roberts for Committee for Green Foothills. Having just gotten this, I'm not terribly prepared, but I had a couple of questions that I'm not sure have been answered. The San Mateo County Local Coastal Program, as it was updated for the Mid-Coast in 2013, did provide estimated build-out projections for both the county unincorporated area and Half Moon Bay. So they had a total of the two areas. And I don't know if you've checked that, Jill, you probably have, to see how that compares with what you're doing now. I brought it with me, so I'm just kind of looking. I'm not going to name numbers right now. But also, as you're talking about your build-out numbers in this updated plan, I think it would also be important to include the county's mid-coast urban area, because since you share sewer, water, and road capacity. You also share the rural area around it, but that's less significant than the urban area. And the county's, the comprehensive Connect the Coast Side project, which I think is kind of stalled out because they don't have the planner anymore that was doing it. I don't think anybody's picked it up yet. They were supposed to be picking it up, but I haven't heard that it has been. So that was a requirement of the certification of the Mid-Coast LCP update, and they were supposed to estimate the build-out for both Half Moon Bay and the Mid-Coast, and then see whether build-out could be accommodated using the sewer and water capacity and road capacity. And if not, and this is the residential build-out, it was not the commercial. If it was not, if you could not accommodate that build-out, then the county's LCP was supposed to look at how to reduce the build-out, and they should be including things such as retirement of lots if you're subdividing, which is very minimal in the county incorporated mid-coast area because they're not really large areas of land that they're available for subdivision. There are a lot of large areas in Half Moon Bay that are available for subdivision, the planned development areas. So these are, really interdependent and interacting areas, and the land use plans really need to be as, I guess, transparent and consistent with each other as well as the Coastal Act. So that's sort of a general comment. And I think, and Jimmy, yeah, I'd also be concerned about the low-cost visitor serving projects that have been approved in the city that have informally just lost that character and have basically become more permanent housing. Visitor serving, they had a priority because they were visitor serving. And I think they got priority water and sewer because they were visitor serving. But I don't know how you actually need to look at ways to ensure that those projects that do get approved under that category actually continue to be providing low-cost visitor accommodations. So that's just a couple of comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker will be Mike Ferreira.
Good evening, Chair Benjamin and Commissioners. There is a lot to unpack here, and let me just say that thinking in terms of gross numbers, this is projecting about 3,200 new residences. And my understanding is that there's maybe 800 unconnected water permits for the entire coast side. And so I'm just not sure that the water department isn't somehow expecting that all the rest of us are going to cut our use in half to take care of the new folks. So it's hard to reconcile those numbers. The item footnote 5, I'm sure I didn't read many of the footnotes, but at least that one got my attention. Affordable housing units in urban reserve, open space reserve, horticultural business, regional public recreation, and public facilities land use designations. Those are all designations that are normally kind of exclusive of housing, and but we're projecting some couple hundred units in those. I would particularly object, I think, and most people would, to regional public recreation being housing areas. And that, I can understand replacing the one unit that fell in the ocean, but I don't really think we should be looking at more than replacing the unit that fell in the ocean. I guess we'll have to do more of this. I also was interested in the question that Commissioner Polgar put forward regarding resources and complexity, et cetera, et cetera. I really would like to, at some point, learn more about what exactly that meant.
That was the buffers question?
Well, I think it was everything, including buffers, that they felt was complex. And so I'd like to hear a lot more about that, because that's a fairly important part of what we're doing. And one would hope that they're on the same wavelength as I think the citizenry is. So I'll just have to reserve comments on a lot of the rest of it when I get a chance to read it. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to speak?
My effort to save paper. Roy Salumi, property owner. I have two specific questions about stormwater. The first is the Dolores proposed the proposed Dolores PUD included in the stormwater calculations? When I first heard about the proposed PUD or PD, I like the idea in the southern part of town, but I don't know if that's included in planning calculations. Secondly, this in the stormwater discussion in the document is the excess water that shows up in impulses when we have a storm on the bluff tops. Is that addressed on the in this section of the document? Because the city is still trying to find a solution for the water that just puddles there and exacerbates the erosion. A lot of that is because of people standing too close to the bluff tops and making erosion even worse. So I don't know if that's included or is that something else. So I'm curious about that. But that is a huge problem, and I've discussed this with the city engineer, and he doesn't have a clear solution because it's a very difficult problem. So they're still looking at that. But if we don't come up with a solution for that, we're going to say goodbye to the bluff tops in decades. So anyway, that's it. Thank you. And here's your paper.
Thank you. So the Dolores PD and the stormwater calcs and that excess water on the bluffs. Got it. Next speaker will be Carol Black. And this is the last speaker card that I have if anybody else would like to speak. Ms. Black.
Good evening, and thanks very much. I own one of the Cypress Cove townhomes. I actually wanted to ask questions more than anything. The first question.
Excuse me, if you could move closer to the
I'm
microphone.
sorry, Carol Black,
Now I
Cypress
got you.
Cove townhome, and I mostly wanted to ask questions, if that's okay.
It's
The
perfect.
first question is there going to be some clarity about when there'll be opportunities for additional public comment? This is a yeoman's effort that's been put forward, and a huge amount of information and a lot to digest. So that's question number one. Question number two, because I live have a condo, townhouse, in the city core, I believe. I am very worried about the large number of additional proposed units in that small area, in particular related to infrastructure. And Jill, picking up on your comments about traffic and parking in particular. Obviously, water, sewer, and all the other things that people are talking about are important, but the traffic is a challenge even today. And I wondered if there might make some thought about adjustment possibly, but also some benchmarks or thresholds as various amounts of development might occur to reassess the impact on the infrastructure and put it into the plan some assessment of, you know, if we're this far along and we reassess the infrastructure and we've really got problems, then maybe we stop here. That kind of approach. I don't know what the threshold should be, but sort of partial steps. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the suggestions. Is there anybody else who'd like to speak on this item tonight? Okay, so we'll close the public hearing on this, and there will be more public hearings, so there will be opportunities. And maybe the first question, staff would probably like to respond, but that last questioner asking about when the next opportunities are seems like one that a lot of people will want to know about.
So we anticipated that, and that will be, we could cover it now. We also had a slide for the end of this meeting to go over that. So what we're intending is to bring out the Public Works chapter, hopefully at your July, your second July meeting, and then establish a timeline for closing out public comment on this version of the draft document. That is not the end of the public input period. It's not the end of the Planning Commission's review. It's just to consolidate the comments that we have so far. Most of these documents have been out since December, so we're hoping that people have had time to look at them. The new ones, please read up on those before Public Works comes out, and then you'll only have one chapter to go. But we anticipate 30 to 60 days for that, and we'll hear what people feel about that, and if it's not enough, we can adjust. Then we'll be going into a phase of revising the document and reviewing that with the Planning Commission ad hoc committee to produce a strike-through underlying version of what you've been looking at, so everyone can see how comments were addressed. And we're trying to consolidate and coordinate community input in line with Planning Commission direction, as well as Coastal Commission staff direction that we're, as you've heard tonight, we're having dialogue with them. So we're also trying to weave that in as we go. I don't know how long that's going to take us right now, because we haven't seen the rest of the comments. We usually, in our experience, we get the most technical and hardest to review comments usually on the last day of the comment period. So, and that's okay. We know that that's going to happen. Everyone deserves to have all the time they need. So that's fine. And once that occurs, we'll update you about that. Would like to respond to a few more things that came up.
Are you guys okay with hearing that, or do you want to ask additional
Yeah, more.
questions before?
I would like to follow up on the public comment aspect in terms of the scheduling. In terms of the comments from the Coastal Commission, it sounds like they've kind of, there's going to need to be some back and forth and clarity and additional. How can that, because how can that be brought forth such that the public can be aware of it and then make comments as well, and also be aware of where there's leeway, like legally, for us to push back if there's something that is important for the community that may be a bit different than the guidance that the Coastal Commission is providing?
We are planning to do that for you once some of these, we want to continue to discuss things with them because what we're finding is they're asking us questions, expressing concerns, and then when we explain what the intent was, they say, oh, we need to think about this some more. So it's an ongoing discussion right now, and I think what will happen is we'll come to probably agreements on maybe 80% of it, and then those other items, we want to daylight real clearly for everybody to see what their guidance was, hopefully to get that from them in writing so you can see it and you can see how your staff is proposing to respond with the subcommittee's oversight, and then of course you can adjust that.
If I can just piggyback on that, not to interject my own questions, but just if I understood Sarah's concern, or if it wasn't, it would be my concern is, I want to be sure that we know where our discretion is versus a conversation between our staff and their staff kind of reaching a decision that has already kind of become hard before we get a chance to look at it again and the public gets a chance to mark it up. So please keep it soft so that we get the chance to do that.
We understand. Yep.
Okay, do you want to give her?
I do, because we can clarify, was that? That was it. Okay. We'd love to be able to provide some clarifications and maybe a little supporting information to input that we've heard from all of our speakers tonight, and we appreciate it. With regards to paying attention to the San Mateo County Local Coastal Program, yes, we have that open on our desks. We understand their build-out. The way that it comes through in looking at infrastructure systems really depends on the system. So, for example, water, we're really focused on our the service area of the water district that we're located in. So that's one universe. With regards to sewer, the modeling needs to understand the capacity of the SAM plant for all the different districts that use that plant, and it's more than the district that is substantially the city's in. We're in 2 districts, but there's others that use it. So that is also being considered in how that's looked at. For circulation, we're using the CCAG VTA, that's the City County Association of Governments for San Mateo County, and VTA is the Valley Transportation Authority for Santa Clara County. They have a model that they built together. It's the best that it does is to a 2040 horizon. I think they may actually be adjusting the horizon farther out. So it will include the build-out not only of the mid-coast, but of San Mateo County, as well as Santa Clara County, and it also makes assumptions about growth in all the connecting areas, including San Francisco, Santa Cruz, et cetera. So for really long-range modeling, that's the best available tool that we have to use, and it should include information from all the adopted general plans and the county's local coastal program. So we believe that we're covering this. We'll go back through and make sure that we are. To stay on the, I want to get back to this. The topic of the Connect the Coast Side work in San Mateo County's build out and the kinds of land use policies that were anticipated to come through with that, including lot mergers and lot retirements. You'll note that your draft land use plan already includes those policies. We didn't intend to wait for the Coastal Commission to direct for them. The input that we've had from the Planning Commission was that you wanted those included and incorporated, and we would fully expect the Coastal Commission to require them in order to have a certified document. So they're already there. As well as a number of other things like reducing build out in outside of the town center areas. So I don't know what else will come through a certification process, but those were some of the the low-hanging fruit, the obvious ones that have come through, in fact, even in appeals that have been of city projects that went to the Coastal Commission, as well as settlements that have gone to the Coastal Commission. One more thing on modeling. So there was a question about stormwater and the modeling for that. To manage expectations, there's not going to be a big new stormwater model associated with this land use plan update. The city has a storm drain management plan. It needs to be updated probably following the adoption of this document. But that doesn't mean the plan doesn't address it in a real firm way. One thing that's going on now is the city's completing a green infrastructure plan, which will be citywide. We're also specifically addressing bluff erosion for the Poplar Gateway study area, which is between Poplar and Kelly, which is city-owned areas. And there's numerous policies in the hydrology and water quality section of the natural resources chapter, that's chapter 6, that address this. That said, your last speaker brought up concerns about focused development in the town center and its capacity to, in terms of infrastructure, to support that development. And we do note that the entire town center is in the Pelarcitos watershed, and or most of it is, and we need to be mindful that that's a concentration and a focus area, and town centers forms of development are harder to manage with green infrastructure projects, which is why, so it's acknowledged, but that's also why in other parts of the plan, what's come through has been to identify where maybe larger scale stormwater management properties could be established. For example, land off Bev Cunha Country Road, or the Beechwood area, and other areas, and I won't dig in much deeper on those. We'll just stop right there, but there's a number of them that are addressed in your development chapter and shown for conservation, stormwater management, and habitat restoration. So that's new to this plan. That was not in the 1996 document. And then going back to, I just want to be clear, because the public comment left an impression that this plan showed over 3,200 units. It's 2,300, I believe. So we just, 2236. So it's 1,000 less, and we just want to be careful about that. The 200 units that are shown in association with footnote 5, all of those units are a part of that new category, the priority residential overlay that we've had input about for wanting to focus that on being workforce relevant to priority uses that are nearby. And it's highly distributed. This isn't all focused on one or two parcels. Now, we did assume, I think, up to 10 units for state parks, which right now I think they have 6, and they used to have 7, and we're happy that the unit did not, that little house did not fall into the ocean. The little house was very, very gently removed with a backhoe device before that happened. So people were worried about that, and I don't want people to be concerned that that actually happened. So anyway, the intent there for 10 is 3 more than what they've ever had. It wasn't meant to be a lot more. We have talked to state parks. They would love to have at least what they've had. They would love to be allowed to do 10 in the right place. They would also agree and understand that any units that they would have new would need to be most likely movable, so they could retreat and not have a foundation that is going to leave a problem. So for example, that house that was removed, the foundation had to be left, and that will have to get dug out later, and that will be another cut back of the bluff in that area. This is the best practice that can be done at this point in time. It can never be restored. So those are some more thinking about that. Did we cover it all? We think we answered most of those except for the question that.
So I tried to keep score of the questions from the public. Mr. Salome's question about stormwater analysis and the compaction on the bluffs, did you have a thought about that?
Well, we did, yes, so we were suggesting that the policies in the natural resources chapter regarding hydrology and water quality address some of that, and the compaction itself has been studied by the city for at least the city-owned properties. Ours in particular are heavily used along the coastal side of the Coast Trail. And that is one of the primary goals of the Poplar Gateways project, which is to address compaction and its associated impact on erosion.
Do we have concerns in other parts of the shoreline besides the Poplar area?
Sure, which is why the policy should generally cover that. Now, we would expect, there's other property owners though, so the folks we're going to have to figure out how to be collaborative with them to do studies and address that.
Yes, Sarah.
Relevant to that topic, I do want to, I realize that the compaction and the, at the bluff edge is an issue, but I think one thing to clarify is that water sitting on the bluffs is actually natural, like that's actually habitat. Those are seasonal wetlands, and the bluffs are those soils they're meant to retain water for a good amount of time, and they actually supports very important species out on the bluffs. And really, in many cases, actually, it's the trails that are leading the casual trails through the middle of that area that allow the water to drain out and to the bluffs. So I'm not, certainly the compaction at the bluff edge, that's a huge issue. I just wanted to point out that the water sitting on those open expanses of bluff is not necessarily a bad thing. In fact, it'd be better if it were able to retain more of it for good habitat. So I just want to clarify that because I think that's an important point as well.
Right, and that generalizes. It's not just in that area. The wetlands are important in many parts of town that way. Yeah, so yes, but to put a sharper edge on, I think, his concern, he was asking about the budget of drainage in Dolores, and I think I heard you respond that we're not doing a lot with drainage. We have it in our hazards chapter already, and there'll be a stormwater management plan after certification. So if at the risk of being presumptuous, the question is, when I think about the policies we have in place, they talk a lot about existing drainages. When I think about the hazards chapter, I'm not sure that they do a good job of addressing drainage for new development. And I realize we aren't noticed to go very deep into this, but if that was where Mr. Salome's comment was, I wanted to be sure that and I could be wrong, we might have that well covered in the hazards chapter too, and I've just forgotten. I'm old.
So, Vice Chair Benjamin, you reminded me, because you and I spent time working on the plan development policies, especially the ones that we called as being factored out or otherwise relevant to all of the plan developments. They specifically call out storm drainage as something that needs to be addressed in each PD generally, but then furthermore, the Dolores PD has its, could have its own additional requirements. Some of the PDs do. I'm trying to find it right now to see what it's been a little while since I
That's okay.
dug into it, but that is, that's where we'd recommend addressing it.
Okay, that works for me for now, and there'll be chances to dig in and comment further on that subject as we get along. So that was my list of the comments we had from the public. Did I forget anybody's comments? And if not, would you guys like to weigh in? Steve?
Well, just one quick follow-up. Jill, thanks for clarifying on the public comments. If I remember correctly, relevant to former Mayor Ferreira's question about the priority residential overlays, if I remember correctly, the brunt of that was to be horticultural workforce housing. Wasn't that the main concept?
That was one of the main concepts. So this is a pretty big new idea, and it also included allowing a little bit of housing on open space reserve lands, which currently don't allow for it, and the housing would need to be associated with operations for agricultural purposes or whatever other Priority Coastal Act use was occurring on those properties. I need a moment. I want to find a little more of a reference, because I think this is a really, this was a big idea. And when we presented it in January, it was presented with the development chapter as a whole. And we dug into this a little bit, but because it was new, I think it needs to get revisited. Also want everyone to remember that this was a use that is added to a designation. It does not replace a designation. So it's not intended to take away the basic use of a property for open space reserve or urban reserve, where we would expect field agricultural uses, or horticultural businesses where we would expect to find greenhouses. Also is applicable to public facilities and institutions. This was an area where we were trying to get at teacher housing or some other types of public service housing needs, as well as state parks, possibly county parks, etc. Now, backing out of that, though, because it's added to existing categories, this is the one place where we can demand and require that every one of these potential units be deed restricted affordable to appropriate levels for the employees that we're really trying to have, not as a jobs housing ratio kind of thing, but as a fit between who lives there and who works there, a match to that. So the affordability is significant. You can't require that really in any other category that we have.
Thank you for that.
Sarah? Okay, so there were a lot of really interesting ideas that came out from the public. And I think that one of the comments that Mr. Ferreira made was with respect to the distinction between the present understanding of what is available water connections and the water connections that would be needed to support development to achieve the maximum theoretical build-out numbers. And I think we need to clarify that. I don't know if we want to work on that tonight, or we want to hold that and bring it up in the context of the public works section, but I think that's a significant issue, and I think it generalizes, although he didn't mention it, people who commute over the hill or people who just drive over the hill in the middle of the day are probably visualizing what it looks like with 2,200 new residences. And if they don't like it now and they can't see how Highway 92 is going to be magically fitted with extra lanes, and if it did, that Highway 1 would not be fitted with extra lanes, and the unincorporated coast-side continues to grow, I think it represents a significant challenge for the achieving anything close to not just the maximum theoretical build-out, but even the build-out that is visualized in 2040. Did you want to comment on that, or is that just a topic I should leave as my comment?
No, we absolutely agree with Mr. Farrar's comment, and that is something you're going to read about in the Public Works chapter. It also relates back to Ms. Black's comment and question about checking in and what kinds of thresholds might be set up, and that will also be in the Public Works chapter. So everybody's anticipating what the Public Works chapter needs to do, and yes, he's absolutely right. There's about 840 non-priority water connections that are uninstalled right now, which is actually far fewer than what would be needed for the county build-out as well. So it isn't as if this is a new issue, and in fact, it's not enough for the build-out of your 1996 plan. So this isn't a new thing. It's just how are we going to deal with it is very important, and that's what we're trying to address with your Public Works chapter.
Yeah, I think this is a particularly challenging chapter because all of the other puzzle pieces are in place. All of the constraints defined by what we think about natural resources and hazards and cultural resources and visual resources. Oh, had a question about that. Are sort of laid out for everyone to see in the drafts that we've put out. And while they're not fixed in stone, and we should be getting comments on the document as a whole as we go along, this piece has to somehow tie them all together and fit into the remaining open space in the plan sense, not open space in the land sense. Sorry. I was trying for the puzzle metaphor and it just failed, sorry. But what I would like to say is that I think in terms of the topics that we will take in comments when we look at the Public Works chapter, to the extent that it has ramifications on all of these other areas, I think we need to be pretty freewheeling. We need to notice it in a way that the public can comment on aspects of the plan, I don't know, in natural resources or coastal access, someplace that's not just the Public Works section, where we have ramifications elsewhere in the document that reflects the way that this is tied together. And I think the question about thresholds is another really good example of the tie between this document, our LCP, and the zoning ordinance. One of the comments that we have bandied about through the course of natural resources and I think circulation was that we have a crying need to define what a significant impact is. When we look at our documents today, they don't necessarily do as good a job as we might like, not the draft document, but our existing LCP. It's very easy to define a development if it's small enough and scope it to say, well, yeah, this is, within the scope of this little area, it's not going to have a significant impact. When the reason it doesn't is that there's a gigantic bottleneck of traffic or whatever, just a little bit further out. And finding ways to define our thresholds of significance in a way that we avoid that kind of shape-shifting to avoid acknowledging and mitigating impacts is going to be a really valuable asset. And whether it's in the downtown area and the demand for parking and circulation that Ms. Black mentioned in her comments, or it's other kinds of resources, I think we need to decide how we're going to treat that. And one thesis is that it belongs in the zoning ordinance, but that zoning ordinance is a long way from now. And if we're going to put this in to this product, we ought to understand why it's the one that goes in and the others don't. I think that the consistency of definitions in the LCP and the definitions in the glossary of the LCP is a really important topic. It has nagged us in our existing LCP, where there's a very extensive definition of a term like riparian corridor in the existing chapter. And if you look in the back, it's this very abbreviated sort of, dismissive something. And so when you read the document, please scour it and compare it to the definitions that you find. I found some, but I could easily have missed some. And the public can double back with me on that to make sure that we don't make that mistake. And I appreciate very much the reasons that the list of animals could move to an appendix. I was comforted by Jill's answer to that, but you may feel differently. So I'm interested in your thoughts on that as we go along. I think it's important to read these documents the way you read a financial report. I don't know about you, but when I started reading financial reports, I thought you started at the front and you read back. But in fact, you start from the footnotes and work your way back. That's how you learn what the documents actually mean. And so the public needs to start with that, and we should be starting with that. At the same time, if you're really lucky and you get a great CEO of a company who can write a great financial report, thinking about you, Warren Buffett, the first page of, the first 20 pages of his quarterly reports are must read. And I want our introduction framework to be like that, because while it's a valuable resource for staff and the Planning Commission, it has the potential to unlock the code of what the LCP does for our development community and our citizens who are concerned about traffic or environment or hazards, so that they can understand how to use the other chapters of the document, and so that people who want to do farming can achieve the goals within the community that we have. I think that's, this document is longer, and I appreciate the Coastal Commission staff saying, oh my gosh, why is this thing so long, this chapter? Einstein said things should be as simple as possible, but no simpler. And that's what, I think if we want to have a simpler model of buffers, that's fine. But, as we hear their comments, I'm going to be making sure that we haven't sacrificed our objectives in the name of simplification. Okay, so I blathered on. Do you have any more comments? Do you want to reload with a few more thoughts? Steve?
I'd just say, based on your enthusiasm for the plan that you voiced just now, I'm very happy that you and Commissioner Hernandez have been working on this so hard with staff for the last couple of years.
Well, staff has done the heavy lifting, but this is the reason I joined the Planning Commission. I wanted to do this in the zoning ordinance. So I'm grateful for the chance to do it. I will just add, I was as shocked as anybody else with the last line of table B7. And I think, my view is if we're adding a lot of homes and we're not adding a lot of jobs, we need to be clear about some assumptions we're making. Are we saying that this is the graying of California, that we have a lot of people who have retired? Maybe we have assisted living facilities that contribute a lot of this growth. I don't know what it is, but if these are people who are working and the new jobs aren't on the coast, then they're commuters. And when you combine them with the people in the mid-coast, we have the potential for some impacts. And it's going to be up to us to understand what the significant thresholds are that can provide a basis for us to make decisions about how much growth we can and cannot support. So your comment, Ms. Black, about thresholds is quite significant and generalizes well beyond downtown, and it generalizes well beyond circulation. So I'd like to say thank you to everyone who has participated in tonight's meeting, and ask you to read this document as carefully as you read everything else, and come back loaded for bear, so that we can hear more of what you're thinking. And we want it to be welcoming. We want to hear all opinions, and we encourage you to disagree with us or agree with us. So thank you for that. Staff, do you have any final thoughts on this?
We're gonna work on that jobs line. Thank you for finding our math error there. That was a transposition. I wanted to note something, I brought it tonight so people can see it. This is the ABEG 2018 projections document. All the data in it is readily available to the public through their website, and the 2040 column there is substantially similar to what they have for us. So we get it. We knew that number looked weird, but we have assumptions that we use when we model, and we're modeling a big planning area, and this kind of thing can happen sometimes. So we'll be able to explain it better next time.
I'll be honest, I don't think it's that weird. I think the ramifications are significant.
Sure.
That's what I think. So thank you very much for your work on this chapter. Brittany, yeoman's work all the way through. Thank you so much for your hard work on this. And I think that closes this item. If no one else has any other thoughts, barring objection, we'll go to the director's report. Jill.
Thank you. So agenda forecast for the commission, July 9th. You will see the Pillar Point RV Park, which includes an after-the-fact coastal development permit for the RV park, as well as a new public restroom facility with associated amenities. There is also an application for a coastal development permit for a new single-family home with an accessory dwelling unit at 543 Filbert. And we will be bringing a memo to you regarding the Highway 1 scenic corridor interpretation that we came through with at the 555 Poplar discussion that we had with you last time. So this will be relevant to this project, and we want to have that in hand so that we're all prepared. On July 23rd, we're holding out that we're going to have your Public Works chapter. It will probably get delivered that day, similar to this, and we will walk you through it. And then people will have had time with this new material, and we will make sure to notice the meetings so that any chapter of the land use plan can be discussed. We don't intend to shut that down at all. Remember, August 13th is a day off. We're gonna take one meeting off for the summer. August 27th is looking like a pretty full night. We had to put the bike ped master plan on a back burner while we were finishing the initial study mitigated negative declaration for it. We're just wrapping that up, and we really want to get that done. So we're hoping that we can do that on August 27th. That requires a long lead time for the notification, which means that we can get you documents well in advance of the meeting. They're big, they're long, so just several hundred pages. So you're going to have some reading. There is a new home proposed at 2804 Champs-Élysées that we think will be ready for that evening, and also I've already mentioned that we'll be looking at an appeal that is related to a decision that I made requiring a coastal development permit for a particular property on Greenbrier, and you will consider that appeal. I told you at the last meeting that we're having a delineation done for Glen Cree, And for the frontage of the Beechwood property, we're expecting to have that in next week, and if there's implications from that that relate to the land use plan, of course, we'll let you know about that. I've already noted that July 16th, we're going to have a really detailed study session with City Council regarding affordable housing topics. There's quite a few. When that staff report is ready, we'll try to remember to send you a link, because I think it will be a useful reference document for the Planning Commission, and of course you're invited to attend. On tomorrow, tomorrow, June 22nd, we have 2 new homes proposed by 2 separate applicants on the 400 block of Correas. And also, just to let you know, we told you about this quite a few meetings ago now, that there's going to be a new EV charging station installed at Bank of America, and that this is specifically exempt from discretionary review pursuant to a state law. You'll see that there's fencing up in the parking lot, so just wanting the public to know that they're starting construction, and their intention is to saw cut asphalt tomorrow and have this project completed in about 5 weeks. So that's underway. We've also been doing some outreach with neighboring property owners, so that although it's not required, we think it's appropriate. We've notified you regarding a workshop that the Coastal Commission and the League of California Cities is hosting on July 12th. It will be in San Luis Obispo, so if you were interested in attending, of course you could, but the workshop will be live streamed. The topics, there are 3 they're all relevant to things that we've been working on. Short-term rentals, sea level rise guidance, and now they've also added the topic to discuss how to develop a local coastal program, which is basically what you've been doing in considering updating yours. I think Bridget provided the agenda, a copy of the agenda to you. Okay. So it's very easy to live stream this from their website. We'll have it running at City Hall if you want to come in and hang out with staff and watch it. Usually I have their meetings going on in the background, so I can keep an ear open while I'm doing something else. But this one's really quite relevant. So take a look at that. If you have thoughts about questions that you would like to have come up through this workshop, go ahead and send them over to me or to Brittany's, because Coastal Commission staff has actually asked us for feedback on what we hope they will cover. So we've already given them a few ideas, and for example, with short-term rentals, we're especially concerned about the individual differences of jurisdictions one to another, and in fact the status of the Del Mar situation, which Del Mar had an ordinance that they were proposing, and the Coastal Commission approved it with significant modifications, and I think they're now in some kind of a legal challenge with that. So we'd like to know what's come of that. I haven't seen updates on that in a while. Yeah, so that is all I have for this report. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much, Jill. So we're getting close here. Do either of my colleagues have any communications, any updates for us? No, thank you. Just one for me. This weekend, the CERT organization was doing their annual, put up the antenna and show us, get the world to see about emergency preparedness, and it was exciting to see it. I appreciated the enthusiasm I saw by the citizens who were doing it. It was nice to see a few people stop by and check in with them, so thank you for what you did. I appreciate it. Otherwise, nothing else for me. So with that, I'd like to entertain a motion to adjourn. Can I have one, please?
I move we adjourn.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Since there are only three of us, that's also a majority. Thank you very much. Meeting's adjourned.